Hello Internet, and welcome to Psycho Month. In a couple of minutes I want to talk about some of the ideas for videos I've got to celebrate Psycho this month. But for this sort of intro video and a welcome to Psycho Month, I wanted to take some time to talk about Norman Bates, who I believe is possibly the most influential, I might stick my neck out so far as to say the most important horror icon in cinema history. There are three gentlemen responsible for Norman Bates. The first being Robert Bloch. He invented the guy. He wrote the story that the film was based on. The second gentleman would be Alfred Hitchcock, the guy who brought the story to the cinema. And the third gentleman would be the wonderful Anthony Perkins for his twitchy, nervous, fragile performance as a new kind of monster, but the kind of monster that harkens back to a much older tradition. I think that Norman Bates is a linchpin character. He faces both ways. He looks back at a grand old tradition, and he also sets the path for the future in a brand new direction, and I think everything can be in some way or another traced back to him. I think it's very appropriate that Hitchcock chose to film Psycho in black and white, just on an aesthetic level. I loved seeing the old black and white Universal logo, and then us having Norman's story told to us, because I think spiritually Norman sits very, very comfortably with the classic stable of Universal monsters from 30 years previously. Frankenstein's creature, the mummy, the creature from the Black Lagoon, maybe less so Dracula, but all of those creatures all had an inherent pathos, which Norman has in spades. They were all outsiders looking in on society. Dracula certainly wanted to get in amongst the hustle and bustle of society. Frankenstein's creature really just wanted to be loved, don't we all? I think Norman's probably the most similar to Gillman from Creature from the Black Lagoon, if you'll allow me a moment, because like the creature, if Norman had just been left alone, he'd have been fine. He's got his own little setup. He's got his own little world that he understands the rules of. It's just these people who come and shake the status quo that cause the problems and the horror that ensues. I think Norman's quite comfortable being an outsider, like the creature. And you can't pretend that although the film Psycho has a modern 1960s setting, that house on the hill at the back of the motel is not a visual and thematic throwback to the good old Gothic days and the castle with the mad scientist or the vampire up there. In fact, aesthetically, that whole place is trapped in the past with all the furniture and the decor and all the nicks and knacks of Mother. It's trapped in amber, it's trapped in the past, and it is a very powerful visual cue to the Gothic horror that came previously. Although Psycho is not trapped in the past, Psycho points the way very strongly to the future. And this is because whilst I think Norman sits very comfortably with the Mummy, the Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein's creature, the creature from the Black Lagoon, he's a universal monster with a human face, and the monsters of this movie are the monsters of the mind. The demons are the demons of a fractured psyche. And Psycho and Norman Bates set horror out in a striking new direction that links directly to Halloween. For goodness sake, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill named a character in Halloween after a character in Psycho. They were giddy at casting the daughter of Janet Leigh the famous, probably the most famous cinematic murder victim of all time. They got her daughter to star in Halloween. They must have been gleeful at that. Halloween, in turn, leads to the slasher genre, your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Streets. Could there be a Texas Chainsaw Massacre without Psycho? Could there be a Silence of the Lambs without Psycho, and all those Oscar wins? And then after that, your Scream series, aping the conventions, the now conventions of a genre created by Psycho. Now, I know some people will be screaming at me that I'm ignoring Peeping Tom. I'm not ignoring Peeping Tom, and I may well do a video on Peeping Tom. I know it came first, but it was not as influential. Whilst Psycho looked back to the previous 30 years and has a direct heritage to the classic Universal monsters, it looks forward 30 plus years to right the way through to the 90s, and Norman's stamp can be seen on the direction that horror cinema took for the next 30 years. He sits in this 60-year span right at the very centre, linked to the past but setting the template for the future. For that reason alone, Psycho is an incredibly important movie. We're not going to be talking about Psycho in Psycho Month. It's been analysed and talked about so much. What could I possibly add? So what we're going to have is a video in defence of Psycho 2, which I will add also to my ongoing playlist of defending underrated sequels. And Psycho 2 is underrated. It's a fantastic sequel. We'll do a video putting Psycho 3 and 4 together and having a look at that, and maybe we'll talk about some of the quirkier Psycho offshoots, like the 1987 TV movie called Bates Motel, which bears absolutely no relation to the current TV series Bates Motel. We're going to be talking about Robert Bloch, because we can't have Psycho Month without talking about the guy who invented Norman Bates. But did you know he wrote 3 Psycho books? We're going to be talking about all 3. The alternate Norman Bates Psycho trilogy. And as a challenge to myself, I'm going to try and defend the 1998 remake of Psycho. So you've got all of that to look forward to in Psycho Month. I hope you enjoy me. I hope you join me for the rest of the videos. And I hope you enjoy me as well. Subscribe for all this goodness.